Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, Leading at the Intersection of Business, Innovation and Law. I'm Lucy Saddleton, Managing Editor at the Legal Innovation Forum. Brought to you in association with ClearyX, this episode features a panel discussion at the Legal Innovation Forum Toronto 2026, exploring how legal services are becoming increasingly connected. Our panelists examine how collaboration between law firms, in-house legal teams, technology providers, and alternative legal services providers is creating more integrated approaches to managing legal risk and delivering business value.
I'm Caitriona Robinson, and I lead client engagement at ClearyX. We're an alternative legal services and software company owned by Cleary Gottlieb, which means that we sit at an unusual intersection. We're part of an elite global law firm. We we operate as an alternative legal service provider, and we develop proprietary technology. So when we talk about integrating the ecosystem, we sit right in there every day, along with my colleagues at ClearyX and our panelists here today. And here's what we've observed. The integration of this ecosystem makes perfect strategic sense. You know, the logic is well documented. But what's less documented is how it works in real life, right? What are the trade-offs, what are the risks, and what are the outcomes? There's one other dimension that I want to quickly highlight, is that the people who fund and execute deals are already looking at the legal ecosystem. So how a company operates shows up in how deals get done and how it gets funded. So I would like to introduce you to the incredible panel we've lined up here today, and we'll get started. So first up, we have Joey Shaw. Joey is Vice President of M&A at Infor Financial, a Toronto-based investment company. My colleague, John Kupiec, who's an M&A partner at Cleary Gottlieb in New York. We have Andrea Cotroneo, who heads up legal at Loblaw Companies. And we have Hina Latif, who is Vice President, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Mercedes-Benz Canada and Mercedes-Benz Financial. So welcome to all of you. All right, Andrea, I'm going to start with you. The first question is, can you give us your experience of when you've been part of a legal ecosystem? How did it work in practice, and what were the outcomes like?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I've learned a lot already this morning. I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. Really short introduction. I lead the legal function at Loblaws. Loblaws, for some that may not know, is Canada's largest private employer and runs Canada's largest loyalty program. My teams support various enterprise functions across our businesses, which include grocery, pharma, digital, loyalty, as I said, technology, and I also have a team that supports our data trust office, which is our traditional privacy office, and data governance across the organization. So it is a very expansive team that covers a lot of ground for Loblaws. And I guess the headline here for me, as my thinking has evolved, is that I don't think about external providers as separate relationships any longer. I really think about them as comprising a legal services ecosystem. That includes, yes, our external firms, traditionally, of course, ALSPs, whom we've worked with as very, very trusted partners, and technology, right, and technology platforms here. And I'm thinking about how to best deploy each one of those across my teams, various teams. So it won't surprise you to know that we think about law firms as increasingly providing very specialized work. So complex litigation, complex transactions, novel, new regulatory things that we're facing where we really need that type of expertise. Sometimes board level matters where we're looking for discussion or judgment. You know, then I think about ALSPs and the role that they're playing, and you know, I think about ALSPs, it's almost filling the gap between my internal teams and my external law firms. So in particular, we have a very long and trusted relationship with an ALSP that has a squad model of delivering legal services where we've embedded them when and where we need them in our businesses to either take down some of the volume requirements, to fill in where we have leads, where we have talent gaps, particularly short-term talent gaps, or to assist on discrete projects. And then, of course, we've got our technology providers, and we're increasingly using those, whether it's AI providers or internal technology that we're building, to integrate all of these and to serve as the platforms through which we're communicating. The last, I think, and best example of how we've integrated this kind of ecosystem for me was a pretty significant transaction that we completed in Q4 of last year, where I had an internal legal M&A team, I had an internal legal regulatory team, I had an external firm, and then I had my ALSP actually doing much of the work that my internal team, the dedicated deal team, couldn't get done in those short months coming up to the deal. So all of that was facilitated by a platform where we, for the deal in particular, we shared, once the permissions were established, we set up several workspaces where we shared communications and eventually, use that in order to facilitate the deal with the counterparty. So this is a complex kind of, I would say, series of partnerships that allow us to move forward and move the legal team forward day to day.
And would you find that in your role as head of legal, would you find that your legal department ends up sort of coordinating this whole ecosystem, or how does that work out?
I do. Yeah. I think we do certainly a lot of coordination, and I think it's debatable whether we're good at it. Right. So we can talk a little bit about that. But increasingly, we are at the intersection of all of these things. So we're at the intersection of data, of governance, certainly of legal, compliance. And it's about how to coordinate that to make that system most efficient. Sometimes it's about project management.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's about actually connecting all those dots. And we do play that role internally. I don't know, Hina, if you have the same experience.
Oh, I completely agree. I think, to your point, we, whether in a larger legal team or a small and very mighty, and your team is indeed mighty, legal team such as mine, where we have a few lawyers essentially across Mercedes-Benz Financial and Mercedes-Benz Canada, we want to have a seamless approach with regards to the legal services, the legal experience that the client has, whether it's dealing with ALSPs, firms, or in-house legal. At the end of the day, they need the deliverable they need, and we need to get it to them. And frankly, I think the client couldn't care less who it came from, provided they get the answer they need, or the answer that we've all agreed upon is the answer they're going to get, essentially. We know it's not always the answer they want. But I'd say on a smaller scale, with a smaller legal department, when it comes to using ALSPs and firms in tandem with the internal legal department, one of my most memorable examples is actually when so background, I started off as GC at Mercedes-Benz Financial Services about, I think it's been 4 years now. Then I got the whole umbrella of Mercedes-Benz Canada as well, which is wonderful. It's the sales and distribution arm, the company you know as Mercedes generally. But I simply, candidly, neither I nor anyone on the financial services team had the expertise to provide the qualitative advice, on-point advice that was needed. I was rebuilt overnight. We were in a situation where we had to rebuild a legal team, and suddenly I was GC of Mercedes-Benz Canada. Great opportunity, not complaining, but the client needed to be serviced. So very quickly, we brought in an excellent ALSP, and indeed they're all brilliant. I'm sure the ones I've worked with are, and your experiences are good too, or great. And we brought in an automotive lawyer, really, who had the expertise to come into the business. We didn't treat them as an outside lawyer. We really treated them as somebody who's a member of the team. And indeed, while I was ramping up candidly and building up a team, they were a de facto GC. They were also helping me learn. I was also taking my side lessons from this lawyer about dealer relationships and things, because I just simply hadn't had that expertise prior to that, not on the sales and distribution side. So we brought her in. She had a work email, so a Mercedes-Benz email address. She was taken to the business as the lawyer that will be servicing them. It wasn't sort of they're behind a curtain. So that really, really helped us at a time where behind the scenes we were needing to rebuild and create expertise and knowledge within the internal legal team. I think that was like one of the clearest examples of when it really, really worked for us. And she was indeed also talking to our law firms where we needed, and she was even talking to our dealers, and we were very quite protective about who's talking to our dealers. And she was, given the space and the opportunity to do that, and allowed us again to continue with having a good reputation for legal, for not sort of falling behind despite the behind the scenes, oh my God, we need a new legal team scenario that we had. So a save the day kind of scenario for our ALSP is an example that's very close to my heart. I think the other one I would note is discrete projects with the ALSP. So smaller work, but just discrete enough where you don't have the manpower or the woman power or the work power internally to do the work, and that was really bad. I tried to can't fix it, but we're gonna pretend that didn't happen. So where they can take on a discrete project, a discrete secured financing project, where the specialism is very much there, just frankly, so much more cost effective than going to a firm who we really rely on for other more specialized advice, but we don't need them to do that quasi paralegal junior level lawyer work with a little bit of oversight from a senior lawyer, and we can get all of that with the ALSP. So for clear examples of ALSPs and working with them in the business, I think those two come to mind. Again, the ultimate point of any of the advisors we use, internal, external, is to create that seamless experience for the client. I think it's somewhat similar to Andrea.
It sounds like you both incorporate the ALSPs into your legal department yourselves. Does it ever come sort of as part of a package with a law firm, like we'll do this amount of work or this type of work and we're bringing in an ALSP to do something else?
For me, it hasn't typically sort of surfaced in that way. It's possible because we have pretty deep relationships with our ALSPs, our existing ALSPs. But I think the point here is that we're not managing one kind of legal service anymore for our internal stakeholders, right? And we're not just consuming legal services any longer from these external providers. We're integrating all of them. And, there's great opportunity in that integration for sure. So there's cost opportunity. Certainly there's efficiencies to be had. There's often great quality and speed that can be achieved when you're trying to deliver, a particular project or a deal. There's also risk, I think, in that kind of integration. And the risk is that, if you don't do it right, it can be quite fragmented. So you potentially have multiple kind of partners here without one clear set of accountabilities, right, or without one of those partners having, the accountability to sort of deliver ultimately. And so you've got to get that model right for sure as kind of the integrator. I think it also goes back to the first panel. As we're increasingly playing this role internally, we do have to think about whether we need different or new skills in order to do it effectively. So again, I'm certainly no project manager, but I have developed some of those skills. I've brought on people in our project management office to assist on some of these big projects and integrations. Again, the technology is key in order to have everyone speaking, the same language on the same platform to each other. So there is a risk of fragmentation there, right, that has to be addressed.
John, I'm going to jump over to you, and I want to talk about how you manage and bill legal services. So when you're billing when you're providing legal services from a law firm directly to a client, the fees are often based on inputs, right? There is the hours, the seniority, the complexity of the transaction. But when you're part of an ecosystem, that changes, right? So there's an ALSP and there's a legal tech company. So a lot of the time, the fees that you're presenting need to be based on outcomes, right? So how is that value changing and how is that showing up in your practice?
It's a great question, and I think it ties into a lot of what we just discussed, because I think the focus of this area is on the cost of delivering the services, and it's a very different thing than the value that's being provided. And I think this whole ecosystem concept is really breaking that down in more granularity. So, I think about this like if you're running an airline business, you know what the cost of running the plane is. You got to hire pilots, you got to put fuel in it, you got to pay for the plane, your gate, all that stuff. You could price your tickets at a fixed price with a profit margin, and that's what you get. But they've obviously figured out very granularly how to price seats, and it's to their benefit, and it makes sense business-wise. I think law firms, no surprise to anyone in the room, are not the best run businesses. And I think we historically have priced stuff with a pretty blunt instrument of using hours and times the rate per person. It doesn't matter what task they're doing, it doesn't matter how valuable the project is. You just get this kind of one-size-fits-all model. I think the introduction of ALSPs and all this technology push has started to make people really think harder about this. And I think from my perspective within a law firm, I think it puts some challenges on us to run our business better. I think there's a lot of opportunities for clients to get more efficiency out of what they are looking to do and do that more cost effectively. But importantly, kind of choose where they're going to get the most value. So if you do have a high value transaction or bet the company litigation, that is something you are willing to pay for and something that you need the experience, need the expertise, need the cutting edge market knowledge, big team that can jump on things quickly. And that's what we can provide. We also aren't the world's best project managers for a massive project. We just don't have the manpower to do it. That's not what we're set up to do. Maybe more than an in-house legal department, but not to the scale of some things that are required. And those are maybe lower value projects. They have scale across a business. They're not as mission critical. So I think it all comes together at the intersection of value and cost, and they're really different things. I think the question is, how do we end up pricing what we're doing in the future? And I do think the model is going to pivot more towards a value-based pricing model, whether that's fixed fees for repeat projects for clients. You kind of know generally how much it costs and how much the client's willing to pay for that type of thing. Whether it's more like a banker model with a percentage of a deal value or a percentage of a litigation recovery or something like that. I don't know the answer to it, but I think we will move in that direction. It'll put the onus on law firms to manage our business and the cost side of the ledger on us as opposed to on the client, which aligns interests, I think, ultimately, because if you think about it, historically, the hours thing was just a measurement tool to justify fees to clients. It wasn't really a means to bill clients. So it's sort of flipped on its head. And then I think, clients will find other solutions for other projects that make sense for them. But I think it really relates to, I think, what you both were talking about, which is this ecosystem concept where you can kind of pick and choose, like your first class seat and your economy seat and whatever, what you need. And you can choose from that menu, and we all in this room can provide that.
I think your perspective here is music to the in-house counsel ears. Right?
Yes.
I don't think it's going to change quickly.
Yeah, what's the time frame on this, John?
I mean, like any other industry, I think change comes hard. There's a lot of built-in systems. I think people are anchored to this, and it's hard. I'm sure you both have this experience to move people off of this. So I do think it's kind of it's an ongoing conversation that probably is best had with the firms and the clients that have long repeat relationships, because you have the trust with each other. You kind of have that knowledge of what the expectations are, and you can have that discussion. I think it's harder for a one-off sale of a company or something that's a different type of thing. But I think it'll change. It'll change. Maybe the people in this room will make it change faster because the pressures of the reality of commercial world come into play. But I do think it's going to change.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. So Joey, I want to bring this into the deal environment where value is very, very concrete. So from your perspective, assessing M&A transactions and valuing companies, what distinguishes legal tech companies or ALSPs that you would invest in versus those you wouldn't? And does the legal ecosystem impact that?
Yeah, so from a capital markets perspective, which is the lens that I typically use to view things, we've seen obviously a massive evolution in the legal sector. When I think about legal technology, legal services, it's no longer, investors are investing beyond just the technology. It's no longer the technology at a face level. It is, does this solve an actual recurring problem for the client or within the law firm? Is this, how deeply embedded is the workflow and how the work actually gets done? Are the unit economics attractive and can it actually scale with the law firm or with the company over time? So we're seeing more and more of those types of questions being asked from investors and looking at things with maybe much more rigor than they would have in years past. And I think what we'll see is sort of a stratification. You'll have obviously the higher volume, maybe lower value or more repeatable tasks continue to get automated by technology and other outsourced providers. And I think you'll still see more of the higher value hands-on work continue to be a little bit more relationship driven. Maybe just building off of some of the points of my fellow panelists as well. I think what how we approach things in the investment banking industry is more of a value-based or a success-based model. That has its downsides too, obviously. But the core thing when thinking about an M&A transaction or any transaction is alignment. So there's, we're no strangers to working on large, complex transactions. We've advised clients like CI, Financial, Wellington Altus, Dental Corp over the years. Typically on deals like that, there are no shortage of professional service providers. There's no shortage of technology being used. There's no shortage of an ability to produce output, produce analysis, produce work. But what is really key is not just the distribution of that work, but the integration of all those service providers. And we tend to take on a little bit more of this role as the investment bank in a transaction, but sort of acting as that project manager and translating all of those risks that might be surfacing from different service providers into actual deal risks. How do they affect value? How do they affect price? How do they affect certainty, financing? You name it, and that's where we really come in.
Excellent, thank you.
Just one point on that I think is something that maybe hasn't been figured out very well, and it goes a little bit to the project management piece and a bit to what you were just talking about, Joey. I think the one function that law firms serve that is unfortunate for us, but fortunate for clients is really like an insurance policy. So if something gets screwed up, we get sued. We have professional liability because we are a chartered profession. Same with like an engineering firm, architecture, whatever. And I think that piece of it is a challenge that hasn't been cracked here because ALSPs say, hey, we don't practice law. In-house legal departments say, we're not going to hold the bag because one of the reasons we hire someone is to point the finger at them if something goes wrong. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's one that needs to be had because if you bust up this work in this way, there is no either single point of contact that's holding accountability or a third party that you can point to and say, hey, we paid you, and part of that fee was to make sure that it was done properly. And I think there's a space in the market to figure that out, but I think it's not been discussed.
Yeah. I think that insurance policy is exactly the reason why, again, the company litigation and the most significant deals continue to be supported by our most trusted external firms, of course. It's one of the key reasons that our external firms are sort of first on the docket when we're building that team around these most significant issues or deals. I agree. It's a tension that we haven't addressed.
Might be a wonderful opportunity for one of the insurance companies to come up with a new product, who knows?
Very good. John, I want to go back to you for a minute because you are a very tech-forward lawyer. You use a lot of technology in your practice. And what do you think the future role of ALSPs is as in-house counsel and private practitioners become more and more fluent in using AI and they've got the technology and tools to facilitate that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to be very bad at predicting the future, like on anything. And from my perspective, it might be a little bit different from the in-house folks. But I do think that as it relates to law firm uses of ALSPs, it's kind of a bridge business between what we used to have, which was nothing, and the future, which is probably a heavy reliance by lawyers on the tools themselves and kind of cutting out that middleman. To use another travel-related analogy, I think of it like travel agencies. Like they used to have to go to someone to connect you to the blue screen to type in, you know, what flight you needed and whatever. And that is now done by the consumer themselves directly. I think that for law firm users of ALSPs, I think that's where the market is going to head because all these tools are getting better and better literally every day. I mean, they're phenomenal what the technology can do. On the flip side, I think there is a large addressable market for more the in-house kind of project management type stuff, whether that's employment-related things or NDAs or, you know, more the large-scale kind of process things, or even many of our large corporate clients essentially have an in-house law firm that can do smaller transactions themselves. Yeah. And they do need support to do the diligence because they just don't have the manpower to do it. But you know, and I think those firms can fill that role and essentially be an adjunct to an in-house kind of legal function in that way. But I think the market will kind of bifurcate where there's less of a role for sort of the law firm kind of higher end value stuff and more of a role kind of direct to client.
Do you have the same view?
I think it's very likely with the technology. I just think the efficiencies do allow for some of the more standardized work to definitely be absorbed by AI, by even taking out some of the junior lawyers that you typically be working with. But I still think with the bifurcation that you referred to, Joey, that definitely the more specialized work, really, really knowing the client intimately and providing that on-point advice that is provided due to the relationship you've also built with the client over the years is going to stay with the law firm.
Yeah. Distribution is great, but there has to be accountability. And John's right, that the law firms have typically held a lot of that in the past. As investment banks were indemnified by our clients. Having said that, giving bad advice, financial advice, legal advice, what have you, isn't typically a scalable or successful model for us. So we still take a great deal of pride, but also exercise a great deal of caution in what we do and how we advise clients. But there needs to be that shared accountability. And again, particularly from a transactional perspective, there needs to be a shared thesis. So everyone can't be operating in their own silo, producing their own work. There's no shortage of an ability to do that. Layer on a Claude or a ChatGPT subscription, and there's even more ability to become an expert and produce pages and pages of information. The client needs to own judgment, just like the company, the in-house department needs to own judgment. They can't be managing projects or translating different outputs from different providers and synthesizing that all together. So historically, that has fallen more on bankers and lawyers, at least in high stakes, complex transactions. But I think that collaboration, we talk about it a lot. We talk about how AI is going to really accelerate that. But it still feels like a little bit idealistic. And I think we have a little ways to go still in terms of how we actually collaborate and how we actually integrate ourselves, not just on a transaction, but in a broader sense as well.
Although picking up on what you said, it's interesting that Hina made the point earlier that your client does not care who or how the stuff gets done. They want whatever they want. I totally agree with that. And I think it's interesting because I was thinking about something my father-in-law, who was a partner at a big firm in New York as well, said. He said, I don't get paid for the $100 hour. I get paid for the $1 million minute. And this was a comment made before AI and stuff, and it stuck with me because that really is ultimately what we get paid for. We charge for all this other stuff, and that kind of supports the enterprise. But what you guys want from us is the piece of judgment or the market knowledge or whatever that gives you that edge in the situation you find yourself in. And ultimately, if it takes us 5 minutes to figure that out, we're still delivering the same value as if it took us 3 weeks to figure it out. You're probably happier if it takes us 5 minutes to figure it out. So I do think there has to be an ongoing discussion, sort of back to that value cost question about what is being delivered, what is being valued, and how do we do that in a way that makes sense for everybody? Because if we just come into it with that rubric of hours times lawyer rate equals fee, it doesn't always work for everybody in this new world, I think.
So we see a lot of proposals coming into the firm, and clients are always asking what technology we're using and what are the efficiency gains. Do you think that they're really asking about the technology and the efficiency or the cost savings? Like, where do you think that lands?
I would defer to the clients.
Okay, we'll go over here, yeah.
I think we're asking about both.
Both,
Yeah.
okay.
Increasingly, our budgets are strained, our resources are strained, and we're seeking efficiencies from our partners, for sure. We're also interested in what platforms, what is fueling that output from our firms, for example. So interested in that and how maybe those can translate into our own environments. I think we're asking for both of those reasons, for sure. I mean, but just back to the first principles on the point of cost and value, it'd be great to actually, at the outset of a project, a transaction, to have that very transparent discussion with the firm. And you can only really do that with those that you have probably a long-standing, deep relationship with, that understands your needs in that moment and understand whatever that project or deal means to the company, right? And having that discussion about value, I think could go a long way in moving us away from that more traditional model.
I completely agree, Andrea, and I think talking of first principles, it really goes to that very first principle of business relationship. At the end of the day, having a good, effective business relationship where you can have the good conversations and the difficult conversations too. And I think being upfront about the fact that you're using a multi-layered approach to whatever the project might be, or the work might be. And even in that, we sort of, as in-house departments, sometimes we're a little wary of being project managers for these, where we're dealing with
stuck in that
providers.
role.
Yeah. But, at the same time, I was thinking about this point because we had a discussion about this. And as much as we don't necessarily want to be project managers, we have a lot of actual legal work to do. We're actually very well placed in-house to be the project managers, or at least not with the PMP and all perhaps, but like a designation, but to be the project manager, because if not, one thing we've learned very well in in-house departments and in-house legal is to look across the business, to understand the business, to be very much embedded yourself into the business so you can see what that project or what the outcome or the aims are going to have, what kind of impact they will have on the business. So I actually think these opportunities to bring everyone in, bring in the different providers, is a really good opportunity for legal to shine and show what they know about the business and show their forward-looking vision about, even with cost restraints, what kind of technology they want to bring in, even with the limited technology you might have, even if you're using just Copilot within your business, for example, when to use the Copilot, when to go to the junior lawyer, when to go to the law firm, and when to say, let's bring them in to do a 1-month project.
Everybody has their role.
Yeah. I think we're very well placed in that. Our partners at law firms can help us with that. If we have the real conversation, the honest one about, I'm not going to pay you this, but this is why. What do you think? I think it can all be quite harmonious.
And maybe the next question is, in that conversation is, how is that product or that output that you're going to deliver to my company going to be better, by using X or Y? And that's why I want to know about what, how you propose to use ALSPs or technology platforms in, delivering that service, right? How is it going to make it better? Better might be quicker, better might be different, more tailored to my company, but how is it going to make it better?
And it's not always about cost.
It's not always about cost. No.
And how do you ensure it's consistent too? And I think that's one. I think that's one aspect where the LLMs will falter or struggle a little bit. Is can the same person within the same organization or a similar organization ask the same question and yield the same result? In order to do that, you need. It's very contextual. You need a lot of that enterprise-specific knowledge that only a Harvey or Legora on the legal tech side, among many others, or a Rogo, Hebia, let's say, that are starting to emerge on the finance and investment banking side, can really capture. So how do you ensure that those outputs are consistent, and that when there are multiple other service providers, that the information that's being fed to the client is accurate, trusted, and consistent, so that they can use their judgment, as Hina and Andrea mentioned, and manage the project and make decisions effectively.
Okay, we have got 4 minutes left, so I've got one question for you all. If you could change one thing about how law firms, legal tech companies, and ALSPs work together, what would that be? I will start with you, John.
Start with me. I think from my seat in a law firm, we tend to get this conversation as a one-sided discussion of how can you reduce your fees.
Right.
And I understand where that's coming from, and our fees are very high, and it's driven by the market. Candidly, I think they've grown much faster than inflation for many, many years, and they've gotten kind of, eye-wateringly high. So that is what it is, and I understand where the question's coming from. But I do think, to the conversation about partnering and whatnot, a lot of this stuff requires a pretty big investment on our part, both in terms of lawyer time. And one specific example, we built internally a tool in Legora to do debt reviews of credit agreements. It took over 200 hours of partner time to build the prompt that has to be refined and updated over time to actually use that tool. So it's a great tool. It's not free. And I think there is this assumption that it's like Google, you just type it in and out pops this thing, and sort of we should therefore lower our fees. And I think that's kind of an unfair conversation. So from my perspective, I think the conversation should be a two-way one about what can we deliver to you faster, more consistent, easier for you to use and translate into your business. And how does that translate into cost, and also sort of repeatable work that we can then depend upon to make those investments. So I think the conversation needs to morph in that direction if it's going to be a realistic one.
Andrea.
Yeah, I think just to build on what we've said earlier, and to that point, it's about having those conversations earlier in any given high stakes piece of work, I'm looking for a willingness for my firm partners to want to engage, with my ecosystem, my ALSPs, my internal teams, and my platforms.
Thank you. Hina.
Honestly, I was going to be very similar to Andrea in my answer, and just mention again, effectively achieving that seamless coordination, and at the very early stages where everyone is at the table, everyone who's going to be working on the project is at the table, and thinking about how we can create those efficiencies and value.
Thank you. Joey.
I frankly can't say it any better than the other three. It's really that conversation that needs to happen at the start to ensure that alignment and that accountability that I've tried to allude to throughout the session. What are we solving for? Who's responsible for what? And from a transaction perspective, again, how do these things impact the deal beyond just a legal risk or a financial risk? How do these actually tie into the broader purpose of what we're doing? But in order to assess that, and in order for people to raise their hand and speak up when they see issues and notice things, they need to have a really firm understanding of what it is we're actually doing and what we're actually solving for.
Well, thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned for the next episode.